Hello, everybody, and welcome to Stories That Shape Us podcast. I'm Joanna Daniel, for those who are new here. Today, I have two very special guests, as you can see, Andrew and Christy Bauman, and they run the Christian Counseling for Sexual Health and Trauma. We're going to have an amazing conversation. Welcome, Andrew and Dr. Christy. I'm just going to read a little bit more, and then you can tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then we can start. So they're psychotherapist, authors. Dr. Christian Andrew Bauman runs the Christian, now let me read it properly, Christian Counseling for Sexual Health and Trauma, and they provide high quality experiential narrative-based psychotherapy from a Christian worldview to fully engage with both heartache and glory without easy answers. I love that bit. Mm-hmm. They believe you cannot enter into liberation without gut-wrenching pain. We follow both a crucified and resurrected God. Our purpose is to walk with those who are wanting transformation and healing, those who feel lost in their faith and are stuck in their pain and are running out of options. We work with both individual and couples. I feel like that. There's so much said in just that. When I read it, I'm like, whoa, it means a lot of work happens here.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Well said. Yeah. We definitely feel like the way towards our resurrection is through crucifixion. And that's kind of the only way forward is deeper into the pain and the heartache.
And that's where some people fear to go.
No doubt.
Yes. But if you've been touched by trauma in any way, you don't have a choice but to go to those places, because resurrection is too easy, and it doesn't meet you where you need it. And crucifixion is the only thing that's honest enough to meet you where you've been harmed and marked and where you've led yourself. So
yeah, it's necessary. And I think it's just so connected to the topic that we want to talk about today. When I reached out to you both around, I listened to this interview, and I thought, whoa, I think I want to talk about this topic with both of you around intimacy and Christian couples. A friend called me the other day, and she was like, Joe, do you know this? Do you know that many people get married expecting sex and intimacy to just be, I'm paraphrasing, to just be like loyalty, or there's not supposed to be any joy or pleasure. And I said, I wonder if there's sexual trauma. And I know that when women experience, not just women, because that's mostly who I work with around sexual trauma, experience sexual trauma, then intimacy becomes a problem. What can we do to help a couple or in that position?
You want to go first, or I'll jump in? Yeah, the first most important part is that we know our story. We know our traumas. We can't go in to work on the marriage if you have an unhealthy self, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be, you have to understand your own story, your own trauma, because unconscious trauma, let me say it this way, undealt with trauma, always reenacted in our current relationships. It comes out.
It does.
So we have to deal with it. We have to address it first individually, because that shapes who we are as a couple.
Yes.
And I would add on that we have scars. We have physical scars that you can look and see where someone's had surgery or had an injury, but we also have these emotional scars. And we can see in the brain that when our partner enters into the emotionally scarred body of their partner, there's intimacy and there's bonding. That is really important when there's been trauma. Story.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is our trauma will affect intimacy. And so it's important that the individual who experienced the trauma get help, do healing. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, because once we know our story and we know our scars emotionally, maybe the ones that are invisible, we begin to share that with our partner in conversation, in moments of intimacy. I talk a lot about working and where women have lost their breath from vasectomy, and that scar tissue is some of the most intimate space for a partner to touch, break over, to bless, kiss. There's so much potential connection in places where there are scars. Know those stories, particularly the ones our bodies don't have to, then we're able to share those with our partner and have intimacy.
So it's a deep knowing, healing, so that we can share that with our partner in a relationship that feels safe enough to do it in, to share that. There's a lot of women that are afraid to share their sexual trauma story with their partners. And so the conversation.
Yeah, they should be, right? If their husband has not shown emotional intelligence and emotional growth, he's probably not a safe person to hear the story. So trust that. Right? Trust that, because he most likely will fumble your story. What I call that type of man is an unaware fool, who is unaware of his own self, his own trauma, and he does harm even though he doesn't know it. Right? He's not malicious in it, but he has not done the work to become a wise, emotional, intelligent man. And so, you do have to protect it. I do believe it's a don't cast your pearls before swine, and our stories are pearls. Right? Our vulnerable selves harm our pearls.
Ooh, I love that perspective. Because, and I don't know if many are aware that that's why they don't share it, or they're afraid to share it because they don't feel safe enough. And what is he going to do with my story when I tell him that this is what has happened to me? Will I be safe? Will I be held?
Right.
Will I be looked after? And maybe they sense that they're not safe, and so they don't share. But it continues to impact the relationship.
Totally.
Yes.
And trust, I would say trust your gut on that one, right? You know if he's a safe man or not to tell.
Yeah.
And you should ask your partner to, if they're an unaware fool but willing, then we ask them to educate themselves. We ask them to read and put themselves in places where they can understand if they're being offered in our traumatized stories.
Yeah. How would you help a couple that has come to you sharing that story for the first time, wanting help around intimacy?
So that's a great question. So what we do normally is couples come see us almost every week. It's probably our biggest offering. And we have them sit face to face. So they're 12 inches apart. Right. So we always probably 75% of our couples work is literally done eye to eye, face to face, because we don't want to lose the humanity of the other. And so we begin face to face, and we begin connecting with our own bodies first, right? Taking deep breaths, understanding what we're feeling in our body. And then we begin to offer our vulnerability. We practice. So the first exercise that we normally do is we'll have them stand, maybe about 12 feet apart, okay, face to face. And then what they do is we begin an argument. So there's always an argument, right? There's always one or two things that we always fight about this. And Dr. Gottman says 70% of marriage arguments are unresolvable, right? So it's not about resolving the argument. It's about how we connect within the argument, right? How do we do intimacy? So they're standing about 12 feet apart. And as they begin to argue, we have them take a step forward if they feel closer, or take a step back if they feel further, right? And so we tell them we're doing this with our body physically because we're trying to mirror what's happening internally. And we actually begin to do, that's our first exercise we normally do. And the goal is closeness. And what we normally do, and after our first session is, they're across the room with each other, kind of on the opposite end of the room, because they don't know how to connect in the disagreement. They get triggered, they shut down. But then we slowly go into the triggers. Okay, what happened for you? What are you feeling in your body? Oh, and we practice. So many times, if the man is not wise with the heart, we have to coach. We have to, okay, what would it mean, to say this, to engage this way?
Mm-hmm.
Why did you become defensive in that moment? What's being triggered in you? And that's where we slowly begin to kind of undo this toxic style of relating that has happened.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we step in because we get triggered seeing our partner across the room and we don't know how to articulate what's going on inside. But it's amazing that we expect each other to touch and physically connect when we watch couples and they cannot even get close enough in the room to each other by talking. And so that's really important is that you're putting a lot of expectation on yourself to be intimate when you really can't even have a conversation where the other one feels understood.
There's so much that was going through my mind as you share that, because I can imagine the depth of work that would happen for a couple. I imagine that when people come to that place, they have to be ready to do the work. They both have to be consenting to do that kind of work.
Definitely. That's why we charge a lot of money.
And that doesn't often happen, right? I mean, people come and they get triggered and they get angry and they haven't done the individual work. And so that's why it's hugely important to offer like an ask for them to do their own individual work.
Yeah. And many times mid-marriage intensive, we almost have to press pause on dealing with the marriage because, right, abuse is not a marriage issue, right? People who haven't done any type of work and on their own story, that's not a marriage issue. That's an individual issue. And if you're not healthy, you have to be at a baseline health to even do marriage work, right? That's why we screen, all of our people and that come, because it's like, I don't want to waste my time, waste your money. Like we've got stuff to do. We've got work to do. And it's like surgery. So we literally say you're coming to the ER and what's the level, like what's the health of your marriage? And it's, we call it the marriage soul. So as long as you've been married, that was the first thing you created. That was the first baby, the first child you had. So if you've been married for 18 years, you have an 18-year-old. What is the health of that 18-year-old as it comes into our office today? And we see a wide variety of conditions.
I imagine, but what I hear over and over again is do your own work first. But oftentimes people don't know that what's happening in the marriage is something that's my story that is impacting the marriage. I don't feel safe to share this part of my story, and I don't feel safe to do it, and I don't know how to do it. I don't know how. I'm afraid of addressing the sexual trauma because I feel like I did something wrong, and that's why it's happening, and maybe that's what's happening in the marriage now. So there's so much, and when we're told that, and I don't know if you see this or how we speak to that lots of marriages break down due to sex and money, and if sexual trauma causes intimacy in marriage, then there's a whole chain of things that we need to deal with before we.
You want to take it? You want me to take it?
That's your wheelhouse.
So who we are financially is who we are in every area of life. Who we are sexually is who we are in every area of life. So if you have secrets with money and you hide money from your spouse, you're most likely going to have some type of hidden sexuality, porn use, right? Secret affairs. Like you're going to live in secrets, right? Who we are, like these, money and sex are the two of the biggest things that indicators of who we are. So we talk about money, we talk about sex every single time we work with these couples, because there's huge indicators of who we are. It comes out. We can't hide who we are. That we address that right away because it's such indicators of health, right? And so that can be the doorway sometimes into your story. Well, tell me about your story of money. Tell me about the time you were first exposed to pornography. What was what did your parents teach you about sexuality? What did they not? Okay, so porn was your mentor. Porn taught you how to have sex. Okay, what is the difference between healthy sexuality and porn sex? We got to talk about this. We have to undo, unlearn, and reparent kind of that broken orphan place in us.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned porn, which is another big topic in marriage, but a very also taboo topic in marriage. How does porn use impact a marriage? What are some of the ways that affects a marriage?
So many ways. I think porn starts a mindset that whoever is using it will not learn how to be in relationship with another human. Mm-hmm. Because you're not in relationship with pornography. You're in relationship with yourself and your own arousal structure, and you're creating arousal structure that doesn't connect with another human being. So it's not, you're not asking that person that you're consuming how they felt today. How's their body doing? What's their history? What do they need? You know, if I come home as a human and I've had a hard day, or I've engaged really hard information, or I've had a fight with my children, or whatever I'm feeling, there's space for me to say, my humanity, to come alongside and say, I'm not in a place of being aroused or wanting pleasure, because I need to talk about what's happening for me. And so I think porn sets us up where you're never learning to have those conversations. You're never learning how to connect. And so because of that, it sadly sets us up to have terrible sex.
Yeah. What I call that is a pornographic style of relating.
Yeah.
And so porn creates first a pornographic mindset. So we have a certain mindset, but then that leads to a style of relating to the world that porn teaches us. So quick pleasure, selfishness, devour rather than honor, all these categories. And that was true in my own life, in my own 13-year addiction to porn. And as I grew out of adolescence and became a man and began to date Christy, realizing, oh, I am not ready for a real relationship. I'm much more comfortable with fantasy. I'm much more comfortable with objectifying than honoring. Mm-hmm. I'm much more comfortable with these toxic ways of relating. And that was, very difficult in our early years of marriage, early years of dating, of me beginning to undo what I had been doing for so long.
Mm-hmm. The undoing, you said, what has been happening for so long. And as you talk, Dr. Christy, I'm listening, there are men who says, well, at least I'm not having an affair. I'm only using porn.
I mean, that if we want to live at that level, then I don't know if you're matched up with the right person. I mean, it sounds so sad. I would never look at my boys and hope that would be all they want in life, is that, okay, well, at least if I'm not acting out, at least if I'm not sleeping with someone else, cheating on my partner, I want so much more for them. And I think that's because we've degraded what we can attain in a sexual history with someone. Well, in longevity of sexuality, where we can actually reach and what we're creating and building in sex and in pleasure. I think we short side that. And then we have these very, very minimal, very small goals for people. I want my boys, I want my daughter, I want them to experience a full sexual life. I want them to create incredible stories with their sex life. And that does not give any room for them to have really low expectations, like, well, at least I'm not with someone else.
Right. And not only is it infidelity and it's an affair, but it's like a shallow affair, right? It's just, right. Healthy sex is an integration of our bodies, of our hearts, of our smell, of our taste, touch, fullness, right? Fullness of what it means to be human. Whereas porn offers such a limited view of sexuality through sight, through sound, but it does not integrate the fullness of actual mutuality, giving and receiving of pleasure. There's no mutuality. It's completely selfish. And so it teaches us these selfish ways of being. But yes, as far as affair, as far as cheating, you can lie to yourself all you want, but you are literally using other women, using other people to have a sexuality that's literally based on degrading the other
humanity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You describe the way you describe intimacy just now, and I completely agree with the degrading, it's shallow, and it speaks to a deeper issue, I believe, of what else is going on for the person who is using porn in that way. But the way when you speak about intimacy just now, of the full integration of our bodies and a full sexual life, and I can't help thinking about my community and some of the women that I talk to, and intimacy is not talked about in that way or taught in that way. And so many don't know what even that looks like or what that means, and and I'm hoping that if you're watching this on your own, get your husband to watch it with you, get your partner to watch it with you. Because in some cultures, Andrew and Dr. Christy, sex is a chore. It's something that you have to do when you go to kitchen tea. Sometimes in some cultures it's called, where you're getting married, and the party that you have before the wedding, and the term that we use escapes me right now. It's the way my brain is at the moment. But you're getting lots of education around how to please your husband. And there's no way where that conversation talks about sex as being full-bodied experience. Explain a little bit more for me, for the woman who is watching going, what does she mean by a full-bodied experience? And how do I have that?
So much of sex, especially where we come from in the evangelical church, is coming through the male lens, right? It's coming from the male gaze. It's coming from, it's funneled through male pleasure, male orgasm. Like it's
male-led.
It's geared towards men and pleasing men. So it's about men, rather than like actually healthy sexuality is based on mutuality. Well, what about the woman's pleasure? What about, her orgasm? What about her connection with you? Like, and I think that's why porn has hijacked so much of our sexuality. And many times the church is much more porn-like than Christ-like, right? Where it's actually preaching a pornographic view of beauty rather than actual mutual love.
Yeah. And there are many cultures that think they've been overridden by again, sort of a rapist mentality. And that's the sad part about all of this. And yet you do see places like a Jewish culture where the law of Ona would say that the woman is in charge of, she leads by her pleasure, by her arousal cycle. And that to learn the divine, we must learn the arousal cycle of the female. Well, that takes a lot longer usually to understand and unpack someone's emotions, someone's story. So when someone's body feels safe enough, feels risky enough, feels brave enough to feel pleasure, and then to share it with the other. And so if we're studying the female body, we might need to spend the next couple of decades with the female's arousal cycle as what we research and what we study. And so, I know culturally, and particularly like Andrew was saying, in the church, that is not something that is encouraged. And yet I talk a lot about the fact that the clitoris, the female, has an organ that was given to her solely for pleasure. It's the size of an eraser head, and it has more nerve endings than the head of the penis.
10,000.
God is telling us something in the female's body, and something about God's belief about female's pleasure that we have to pay attention to. It's very clear just in her body. And so I think that's just something we want to overlook because it is taboo, or because we know we will be overruled. And when women know that they don't have a way out, then they concede and they find a way out. And so it becomes marital rape. It becomes places where they in their mind tell themselves, this is what I have to do. And they know they're going to lose because they know they're not in a partnership where mutuality is going to be invited.
There's so much that you said, so much that you said. Listen to it slow and go back and listen again. You talked about, Andrew, sex being taught through the male lens. So much of it. is through the male lens, their pleasure, what they feel. And then Dr. Christy, you talk about the female arousal cycle. And I'd never heard that, but I want a woman who is listening to begin to study her body and to learn. And maybe the conversation then can change in your marriage, in your relationship. If you notice that something is wrong, then maybe you can look at these two things and thought, which lens did we learn about sex through? And what's my arousal cycle? Maybe I need to learn about a little bit more about that, that part of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well said. I just want to add this. When you throw in that 1 in 3 women have some type of experience with sexual abuse, mm-hmm. This is where female pleasure becomes distorted and I believe hijacked by evil, right? Because if you have experienced a type of sexual abuse, many times you turn against your own body. Mm-hmm. You make war with your own pleasure. Yep. Because maybe your genitals felt something in the abuse and you're like, well, wait, why? Then that's really only because your genitals worked. That doesn't mean you enjoyed it. It doesn't mean you. So many times women war with their own body, war with their own pleasure because of the history of abuse. And so you can't even learn how to enjoy pleasure because it's associated with such pain and heartache.
I completely agree with that. And when I do groups for women who are healing from sexual abuse and say that bit, it changes so much for so many because your body responds because it was created to respond, but it's also connected to pain. And so the part pleasure is connected to pain. And then that means I've done something wrong. And there's something about me that something must be wrong with me intrinsically. Then that means I cannot function. And so what I hear and what I've always shared is that sometimes we're triggered at that time. We're triggered. Women sometimes are triggered in intimacy. And I'm not sure I think I read this when I was reading How to Not Be an Ass, that when you talk about the pornographic style of relating, I always smile when I say the title of your book. But a lot of women don't know that I'm being triggered. And again, the relationship is not safe enough to say, can you stop? I'm being triggered. Can we talk about this or give me some time? There's a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of stuff that comes as a result when she's not free, safe enough to say, I'm triggered, please stop.
Yeah. Christy, would you mind sharing the story of trauma briefly in your own body of losing our son, Brave, but then re-engaging sex after that horrific loss we suffered?
Yeah. So I also, before I share that story, would just say it's interesting because women stop believing in their bodies and they stop trusting it, or they just get deflated in a sense of like, there's no hope. And so then I think also a partner, like a husband, might feel that too, particularly if you're married to a good man who's foolish and doesn't know, because the church is leading with a patriarchal and objectifying lens. Women then feel that oppression. So even if their own husbands didn't do anything to them, they feel the weight of being oppressed. That does not lead our bodies to want to have pleasure or explore pleasure or invite people to it, because you feel defeated by the society that you're a part of. And so I just want to say that also could be something for women that they might feel. But in our story, particularly, trauma was a huge part of our story when we lost our son. And I think the story you're alluding to is, it wasn't necessarily after. There was so much grief after we buried our firstborn, but I later in our marriage had a miscarriage and I had a D&C. And I remember when after that surgery and losing the baby, it was a while after, but Andrew was approaching me. He wanted to have sex. And I really immediately felt in my body, the last thing that entered me was tools and forceps to remove our child from my body. That place, my vaginal canal, in a sense, was the Via Dolorosa. It was a place where I had known grief and suffering. And so then to have my husband, in a kind way and in a patient way, say, like, how do we re-engage pleasure and sex after this? It was so confusing for me to figure out what words I needed to say, but I needed to say something. I needed him to understand where I had last gone in my mind and heart, in my body, before he was going to be invited to enter that. I needed him to know me before he could even know me physically. And I think that's just a really important piece for us to explain, is that when we have trauma in the body, it's not fair for us to think in our minds, well, me as a woman, it would not have been kind for me to say, oh, I need to just be aroused and I need to move into pleasure, if that's not what I was feeling. And my body was telling me that's not what I was feeling. I need my partner to know what he's being invited into.
And in that, she is inviting me to know her, which is intimacy, right? And so we can't view sex as just merely intercourse. We can't view sex as just orgasm. We have to have a wider definition of what sex is. Of it is to know and to be known, right? That is the essence of, and what we actually long for, right? Because the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. And so what we long for is connectivity. We long to be connected with our partners. And if we just make it about orgasm, it's such a shallow pornographic view of sex.
The opposite of addiction is connection. Thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Christy. That I know is going to be such a freeing piece for a lot of women who don't understand what is going on in their bodies. And I'm hoping it's going to help a couple to be able to talk about connection again and how to re-engage. I wrote Sex is Not the Problem, Love Is, how to help things that a woman who has experienced sexual trauma wish their husband knows, and talk a lot about connection and attachment and that whole story that's going on that she wants to share, that she wants to talk about in order to connect. But that's what I hear running all the way through our conversation this afternoon, is about connection. It's about connection. It's about our stories and how we share our stories, and whether or not we're safe enough to share the story, and what can we do to help. Now, I'm going to ask you as we wrap up, and I know you have something that's happening on Wednesday that I would love our audience to know about, because I know that there are people who will benefit. What can they do at home, beginning to do, if the conversation has never been about sex before, if they've never talked about it, but everybody knows it's an issue, but they've never talked about it before? How can a couple begin to have that honest conversation to move their relation towards the depth of intimacy that you've shared here today?
You want to take it?
Well, I was like, you are always so good at bringing the exercises that need to happen. But I think what I would circle back to is eye-to-eye contact, because really what we're trying to explain to people is humanity is lost when we don't hold someone's eyes. And so we can make a lot of assumptions about our partner when they're talking if we're not really concentrating on seeing them. Right? We can hear our own thoughts louder than what they're actually saying. We can hear our belief systems. We can just not be in a place of curiosity. But I think eye contact is one thing we would really encourage. I mean, what we eventually encourage couples to do is to try to have sex, have intercourse and orgasm with eye contact, while holding eye contact. And basically but you don't start there. You start at just holding eye contact when you're speaking to each other. And so I think that's one practice that could be really helpful.
Basically, we encourage what's called a slow startup. Yeah. Dr. Gottman's marriage research says the way an argument starts is the way an argument finishes. And so if you start high intensity, you start being defensive and reactive, well, that's how it's going to end. So we start a slow startup. Hey, babe, are you in a good place to, I have a complaint. Are you in a good place to hear it? Right. And then you connect slowly, make sure you're in a good place. No, I'm busy right now. How about lunch? I got some free time. We can sit and talk about it. Okay, great. We talk about it eye to eye. We engage the conflict, and you can get mad and be angry at each other. Anger is actually beautiful and great. How do you do it well? How do you have clean anger? How do you be angry without being aggressive towards each other, without talking down to each other? keeping that respect towards each other. And so we learn how to fight in a clean way, but you've got to be first. You got to be authentic. You got to be real. So many people are hiding, and so many women, especially that I work with, are hiding because their man is insecure. Their man is a grown child, and they're literally hiding and catering to his insecurity. And that's just the worst. It makes me want to scream, because they're literally losing their own health for the sake of someone unhealthy.
That is way. Whew, that's a lot you said there. The insecurity, the grown child. There's just like so much growth that needs to happen. But one of the things that has run through what Andrew and Dr. Christy has talked about is intimacy, connection, that will take you to a deeper place in your relationship. They have a program coming up on Wednesday that it's online. Do you want to tell us about that program and where people can find it?
Yes, it's a one-day workshop, and on April 5th. And we are just going to, it'll be live. And then if you buy the ticket to go to it, it'll be a download that can come to you if you're not there to make it during the actual time. But basically, we're going to walk through what it means to co-create as a couple. And so what Andrew alluded to earlier is that we believe that every relationship, every marriage is the first thing you create together. It's the first soul, it's the first child. And then we look at the health of that marriage, that child. How do you tend to it? And then we kind of begin to unpack what it means to co-create. And we believe that sexuality is part of co-creating. You co-create pleasure, you co-create safety. And we're just going to go into that in detail of what it looks like for a couple step by step to kind of look at both of their individual styles of coming to relationship, and then what they co-create when they're together, how they trigger each other, how they invite each other. And we're going to walk through and allow couples to kind of workshop their own relationship and their own style of co-creating.
Yeah. So a lot of the stuff we talked about today, just be in a deeper way. We'll go into it more fully. It's called Co-Create, Cultivating an Alive, Authentic, Lasting Partnership. And you can sign up on Eventbrite and buy the tickets. Social media, buy tickets there to be a part of that, or to get the recording if you can't attend live. But we'll do a lot of Q&A as well. And it'll be about 5 hours over the course of the day.
Thank you. My husband's is in a different time zone to me at the moment. So I don't know how that he's in the Caribbean. So he is 5. No, he gets back on Wednesday actually, but I don't know what time it will be for us. So maybe we'll have to get the replay, because this sounds like something that I'd want to co-create, to do together. It sounds really fun. If you set, I'll go on Facebook, get the link, put it below this video as well, so people can click on the link and go and find out more about how to become more closely connected as a couple. And I think that's the aim. And as I'm listening, as I'm thinking, I think we can have joy and pleasure, as we read when we read your bio, in our relationships, in our marriages, and we can heal our stories so that when we come together, we can have a home, can be a happy place for everybody. And our sex lives don't have to be mechanical, boring even, or duty, a chore, and all those things that it feels soul destroying to me. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Christy and Andrew, for coming and for sharing with our community. I hope this won't be the last time. We'll see you at Wounds to Scars. We do so much here in terms of retreat and conferences. I wanted to do a retreat just around sexual trauma. I'm praying about that and about what that might look like. Maybe we should do it for couples. We'll see. And we'll see how we make that work for people to grow deeper. Thank you so much for joining me in this episode of Stories That Shape Us.
Thank you.
I hope you'll join me on the next story.
Yes. Thank you, Joy.